Hello, and namaste, everyone. Welcome back to the webinar. Uh, thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to our 34th webinar of Nepal Mental Health Research webinar series. I am Pinita Acharya. So, as usual, I am moderating this webinar, and I am working as a research officer at TPO Nepal. So, as usual, we have Ritika Singh, who is a research consultant at George Washington University for our tech support and any kind of assistance in this webinar. So also we have Dr. Brandon Quat, who is professor at George Washington University. He will be introducing our speaker later. So as you can see in the screen, the title of our 34th webinar series, which is Involvement of Persons with Lived Experience of Mental Health Conditions in Mental Health Research and Interventions. So if you are joining for the first time, and I'm just giving the background of our webinar as well. So these webinar series are being conducted by TPO Nepal in coordination with George Washington University, focusing on the capacity building of early and mid-career mental and behavioral health researchers in Nepal. So with that, as you can see in the screen, the speaker of our webinar, who is Claudia Satter, and our Dr. Brandon will be introducing her later on. So before that, we have some couple of housekeeping items or reminders which we share in our each webinar. So first thing first, we do record our webinar, and I think the recording has been already started. So the main motive of recording this webinar is to share the webinar recording and materials to the registered participants after the webinar. Also, we share the recording and materials to the registered participants. If just to remind you that if you haven't registered the webinar, please do register the webinar. You can find the registration form in our social media pages of TPO Nepal. Also, we will share that in the chat box later on. The second reminder is related to the webinar structure. So basically, the duration of our webinar is an hour, which includes the 8 to 10 minutes of introduction, like I'm introducing this webinar and sharing some reminders and housekeeping items. After that, we will have the presentation of our speaker in her with her slides and with her experience or related everything related to the title. In that time, we do not interrupt her, but we do write any kind of queries or concerns in the chat box, or later on we will be having the 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A sessions where you can ask her directly her questions, raising your hand using the Zoom app, or we will facilitate the discussion and Q&A sessions after the completion of our presentation as well. Then and after that, we will be having the summary discussion or summary remarks from our speaker. Then we will wrap up the webinar. So we will try to stick in that time. So sometimes we will be having we feel like there is a limited time in our webinar, but we will make sure that if you have any kind of queries and concerns, we will reach out to you while sharing the webinar materials as well. And the next and the last reminder is related to the feedback form. So as I have already mentioned that this webinar series are focused on the capacity building of early and mid-career researchers, which means all the topic and titles are related and suggested by our participants and registered participants or any kind of networking events. So if you have any kind of suggestions regarding the title or any time, duration, anything, so you can fill the feedback form and share us to our email as well. So our Ritika ma'am will be sharing the feedback form in the chat box as well. So we do conduct these webinar series in every third week of every month, beside or except the Dasai and Tiyar break. So invitation email will be sent out with dates and speaker details to our network members, Nepal Mental Health Research Network members. So other information will be shared in our social media pages, like in our TPO Nepal Facebook page or Twitter page or in LinkedIn. So you can directly email us to our amateur email address if you have any kind of queries or concern related to the webinar or for further future events as well. So for now, introducing our speaker, I would like to request Dr. Brandon to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Benita, and it's an absolute pleasure to be able to introduce Claudia Sartor, who is really incredibly and dedicated to changing this field, and also just a absolutely wonderful and fun person to be around. I've known her for a couple of years now, and can say it is really a fruitful collaboration, and we can't stop collaborating. So I'm just delighted that she'll be able to share her experiences with you all today. So Claudia Sartor is the Deputy CEO of the Global Mental Health Peer Network. She's a prominent leader in global mental health advocacy. She's based in Johannesburg, South Africa. Claudia has dedicated her career to advancing holistic wellness, workplace mental health, and lived experience expertise frameworks. Over recent years, she has increasingly focused on the integration of lived experience into global mental health research, recognizing the critical role of firsthand experiences in developing impactful mental health initiatives. At the Global Mental Health Peer Network, Claudia leads the Experts by Experience Consultancy Services Unit, where all services are delivered exclusively by individuals with lived experience. In addition to her work in the consultancy, Claudia serves as a guest lecturer at universities globally. She engages students and faculty on the value of lived experience. And through her articles and advocacy, Claudia consistently emphasizes the transformative impact of lived experience expertise across all areas of mental health. She's widely published, including in Lancet and also in Global Mental Health Cambridge Prisms. Thank you so much for joining us today, Claudia.
Thank you. And thank you for such a nice introduction. Cool. So shall I just go ahead with my presentation?
Yeah.
Cool. Great stuff. So firstly, also just thank you to everybody for being here. I'm really excited to be here and go through this topic with you. And hopefully we get some engagement after my presentation and we can have a nice chat. So Benita and team, can you see my screen? I can't see you guys. I don't know why. So just maybe let me know.
Yes, Claudia, yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Right. Okay. So I'm not going to go into the topic. We know what it's called. So just focusing on the involvement of persons with lived experience. So as Brandon mentioned, I'm from the Global Mental Health Peer Network, also known as GMHPN. Here you will see some of our events that we've attended. Here's some where Brandon's been, where I've been with him. And then this is our CEO, which I'll talk about just
Claudia,
now.
we're not seeing the presenter view yet. It's
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's not the presenter view yet.
Oh, how odd. Okay. This is so strange. And now?
Not yet.
No. This is so weird. Let me try just one more thing quick. It was working perfectly just before.
Yep, the Murphy's Law we talked about.
Right? And still nothing?
Nothing shared yet?
Benita, can I send you this latest updated version and you can just maybe help me out there? I don't know if it's just a technical issue today.
Yeah, sure, please.
Okay,
Yes.
Sorry about that. That's bizarre. It was working.
No problem.
Okay. Okay, so I'm not going to start all over again. I think I'm just going to go straight into the conversation. So a little bit about the Global Mental Health Peer Network and how we started. And so it was founded by Charlene Zinkel, who's our CEO, person with lived experience of schizophrenia. And over the years, she really has become one of the key I don't know, probably like somebody that stands out so much when it comes to lived experience expertise. She established the GMHPN in an attempt to bring people with lived experience together, having one voice, one platform where we could share our experiences, our perspectives, and our recommendations on what we thought would need to be changed in order to improve mental health care, interventions, policies, etc. So it is through her lived experience that she created it. And we've adapted quite nicely, and I'll explain how we moved on to our consultancies and why it's important for lived experience to be included in research and interventions. So our mission is to empower persons with lived experience through leadership development, peer-to-peer mentorship, and we've also got a peer-to-peer support system. So that's very internal. The aim is to create capacity building so that our members who join us have an opportunity to learn through our mentorship workshops and training that we have to help them elevate their career to a local or from a local to a global level in terms of advocacy, and they get to pick their own route. If they wish to pursue research, then they would look into lived experience and research. Or if they were looking at changing policy, then they would learn about how to, approach stakeholders in the policy making sector. So it's really about growth, mentorship, and support. Then our mission is to really embed the expertise of people with lived experience in the development and reform of mental health policies, research, and mental health initiatives in general. Collaborating with key partners or stakeholders to continue revolutionizing the world of mental health. And the aim is there to really reflect on the needs of mental health care service users and the extended communities. So I'll talk a little bit later about why it's so important to have a lived experience perspective in there, because then you're looking at the real needs of a community and the real needs of a service user, right? So without their input, we can't really put something implement it or try to develop something if we don't have input or perspectives from the people that are directly affected by those interventions. And then co-leading and leading mental health initiatives and collectively advocating calls for actions in a meaningful and authentic manner. So really just there's a few objectives, but to highlight, it's really to promote equality in mental health systems, care, and community dialogue. So to show you a little bit about who we are in terms of our diversity, so we've...
Claudia, sorry, very sorry to interrupt. Bintaji has received the slides. Because the slides are not advancing, Bintaji can share the screen and you can proceed. Please let us know which slide, Namrata.
Okay, so this one would have been slide 5.
Okay.
Perfect. We're all set. Let's go to slide 5.
Okay.
And back to you, Claudia. Thanks, everybody. Good team effort here.
Thanks.
Bintaji, slide 5.
Cool. Great. Thank you. Just the one before? There we go. Okay, so you will see that we have diversity in our representation. So everybody within our network, running from our board of management through to the CEO, myself, deputy, and our staff and members that have joined us or representatives are all people that identify as living with a mental health condition, right? And you'll see the different age groups, you'll see gender, income, country, the demographic, what we do in terms. So as it stands now, we're at about 100 plus publications. We've attended 200 plus international workshops, etc. But what's really important at the moment is from around the world. So from the 6 WHO regions, we've created 4 quarters. We've called it the 4 quarters of the world. So we have representation in the 4 quarters within 52 countries and represented by 174 members, which is really great. Next slide, please. So filtering through, I've explained to you our mentorship aspects and how we assist our mentorships develop and become leaders in mental health advocacy. What we then created is a specific unit called the Expert by Experience Consultancy Services Unit. So the idea here is it's a unit on its own where we provide services. So we normally consider it as service users, right? Correct terminology. But what we're doing here is we're taking our experiences, and through the mentorship and development and leadership, what people learn is then how to express and change that narrative into something more advisory in a different sort of capacity to inform and reshape the different areas that we mentioned earlier. So that's where our EBE, which you will see is just a short little thing, an EBE unit. These are just the different roles on the right: consulting, advisory. We review papers, toolkits. We help with peer researching, facilitating workshops, focus groups, etc. We have done a lot of work over the last few years within the research domain and with academic institutions. So an important thing is also maybe just to remember that we're using the word expert by experience. So there's a switch between lived experience and expert by experience, but that's just to create the professionalism of what we bring, right? Next slide, please. So at the bottom, the slide's just really to show you who the sectors are that we work with. So that will be that could be corporate, so your bigger companies, smaller companies, academic and research, non-profit organizations, governments, international agencies. So we work a lot with WHO as an example. And then now we're sitting on advisory boards for donors and funders to help them, kind of identify the areas in mental health that need help as it relates to lived experience. And so we sit on their boards and committees in an advisory capacity. Next slide, please. So one of our biggest advocacy moments was talking about equal pay for equal work. So there was a lot of stigma around the fact that people with lived experience were not equipped enough to be seen as providing adequate information and advice and services. We've proven that that is not the case. And secondary to that is there are international covenants and there's international laws, right? Human rights frameworks that say, actually, this is the case, right? So in this case, we've got the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which speaks to fair remuneration. So we should be provided same remuneration, just like any other stakeholders, obviously within reason, for equal pay and equal work. We spend the same hours working, same time, same days, the projects are the same, the workload is the same. So it's just the area of expertise that is different. And I think that's what's very important to remember. I've put a screenshot of one of the publications where I did write about it. So I'm happy to share with the team later if they do want to share more, where we do talk about this. And there's a few other articles where I do go into that as well. And it's also good to remember that this is also another way of really improving the environment in the sense of economy, right? Sustainable development. This is something where it's not just helping us, we're creating jobs, we're creating a sustainable, developed system within different sectors. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to go through some of the documents that contribute to the global framework that recognizes the importance of including people with lived experience in mental health related endeavors. So you will see that you may not know about them. So it's good if you don't at this point, maybe going to read through them and just kind of see how that would fit into your work. So if you can go to the next slide, I'll just go through some of the international documents. So you've got the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, right? The UNCRPD, recognizing the valued existing and potential contributions made by persons with disabilities, and that also means psychosocial disabilities, to the overall well-being and diversity of their communities. And I've highlighted the words that really stand out to me, which is potential contributions, communities. They should enjoy the full fundamental freedoms of full participation then with all of this comes a sense of belonging, and there's advances and significant changes that can be made to society and to the things that we're trying to change. Next slide, please. We got the WHO's World Mental Health Report, which also we were a part of looking at, which also says people with lived experience are crucial stakeholders in mental health. Their participation is vital to improve mental health systems, services, and outcomes. And such participation includes full empowerment and involvement in mental health advocacy, policy, planning, legislation, program design, service provision, monitoring and evaluation, as well as research. So these frameworks are out there. It's just a matter of getting to understand it and know it, and then how do we put those together to make this a meaningful participation when we work together. Next slide, please. Then WHO went a little bit further, and they created the framework for meaningful engagement of people living with NCDs, mental health conditions, and neurological conditions, saying the same thing as what the others have said. So basically, we're just putting it out there that actually we didn't just come up with this as people with lived experience, but that there are existing frameworks to work with. So we'll go into a little bit about what does meaningful engagement mean and what does that look like with people with lived experience. Next slide, please. So what is lived experience and lived experience? Oh, I see there's a cross next to value, but I think that's just because of the technical issue that's come through. But so if we're looking at lived experience, right, who is someone that has lived experience? So it's not someone who necessarily has been diagnosed with a condition or a diagnosis, right? It's someone who's gone and sought peer support potentially, or gone to their traditional healers for a long period of time, where they, or maybe a peer support system, and what they've done is that they've navigated systems, they've navigated symptoms, so they're able to give recommendations based on those experiences. So just a big thing to remember is somebody doesn't have to be diagnosed with, because then potentially we would be eliminating a big population of people that could help us. So with our experiences, right, we carry a unique and in-depth knowledge. We can bring what we've experienced. So maybe we had really bad service, or within the mental health care system, maybe it was just a really bad service. Things, we look at what worked, what didn't work, what could have been improved. If in an ideal world we could have put out recommendations, what would that look like? And that's based purely on the narratives and the journey that we've gone through, to say, here's our perspectives and recommendations on what we should be changing to make services better, to make it a quality service, one that's approached by a human rights framework and a person-centered approach. That means that we would be bringing in ideas and perspectives that would eventually, in years to come, remove the barriers that currently exists when we're looking at the inclusion and equality of people with lived experience into mental health. It would also look at how our recommendations could essentially be informing organizational structures, institutions, and improving that for the better, right? And you can't get that in-depth real life experience if it's not somebody that has had an experience with a bad mental health care system or inaccessibility too. So we need to be looking at that. The value of what we can bring really is unique. And we can contribute in ways that other experts can't, in the sense that we all have our own expertise. We all bring to the table different things. So it's just opening up our minds to understanding what lived experience could bring in. Still bearing in mind that it would still be its own expert field with its own expertise and skills. Next slide, please. So what we also do is advise decision makers on how to strengthen and mainstream mental health interventions into the various sectors. We provide cost-effective and practical solutions to enhance effectiveness in mental health and referral systems. So this would all still fall within our expert by experience consultancy services, right? Because then it would just depend on what the client would need, what the sector needs from us. Next slide, please. So what role do we play? Okay, so kind of already touched on that, I suppose, earlier, but it's essentially trying to enhance diversity, equality, and equity, and ensuring that the engagement between all the stakeholders involved in a particular project, in a particular initiative, intervention, research project, that it's all really just fair, equal, beyond the moral. We're thinking morally this is a good way to do things, but also legally and based on a human rights framework, are we doing this correctly? Next slide, please. So specifically in research co-production. Next. Okay, so the biggest thing for us is, and this is based on experience over 3-4 years, is when you're starting your research projects, when you're starting interventions or the thoughts of, and you're researching on that, include lived experience organizations or people with lived experience from the beginning, right? So you're going to start with right at the beginning. What is your research question? What do you plan to do? How would you develop the project? How would you implement the project? How are you going to collect the data? How do you then, in your research methods, how do you include people with lived experience as well, right? Then applying it, then you guys will do your research. We'll go through all the phases. Then right at the end, if you're including us from the start all the way through, right at the end, we're then able to, as an advocacy organization, take those findings and actually push for those changes. So advocacy brings with it a very strong element. If we're not included in the process, it's very difficult for us to just advocate based on maybe, here's the findings and here it is. We need to have been part of the whole process, making it fair, equitable, and realistic so that we as advocacy organizations can also help you kind of make those changes, and vice versa, right? Without your research, we can't advocate. So it's a very, we should be working together, right, to get to this. But very important, include from the start. Right at the beginning of your project, thinking and planning, start thinking about how do you include people with lived experience. Next slide, please. Okay, let's look at some of the barriers. So some of these obstacles to our inclusion might seem really obvious, but sometimes it's not, right? So you've got stigma and discrimination, which inevitably devalues personal and collective experiences. So that means that what I felt is completely like, it's not a value. It doesn't mean anything. It means I can't bring anything, right, to the table, which I mentioned earlier, is that misperception of being unable to contribute because of my mental health condition. And then there's that misperception that we're unable to make decisions, so therefore we're unable to participate in the decision-making process. So what happens then? There's another ripple effect, which means then we're going into power imbalances. We're bringing upon tokenism, which is something we don't want to do. So just on stigma alone, and just those misperceptions can create many obstacles. Then if we move on to the middle one, there's obstacles about how to involve lived experience meaningfully and authentically. So what we're trying to say is, you don't just include people with lived experience in your projects just because you have to, number one. It is now a requirement by quite a few funders that you have to include people with lived experience. So naturally, the first thing you're going to do is want to include them. But you can't just do that for a tick box. You've got to take it further. What does that look like? How do we bring them in, right? There's that, again, misperception we're not qualified. Then there's a concern about ethics. Then there's a concern about the well-being of the participants during the sessions or during your project phases. But there are ways to circumvent this and mitigate some of the risks that come with this. Again, reinforcing the importance of including us, because we have our own internal structures that will help with that type of stuff, right? Then another really big one is the neglect to adequately budget for lived experience inclusion. So going back to my slide before, if I'm saying include people with lived experience from the start, they should be included already at the budget stage as well, right? Because if you're going with your proposal and you're going with your research, but you haven't adequately budgeted, you can't expect someone to do huge amounts of work and not get paid, or get paid really little just because they're someone with lived experience. That's very, very important. So including them from the start, and then start looking at budget as well from the start. Work together. You guys are stakeholders. You're working together on a particular project. You're collaborators, right? You lead applicants. You should be doing it together. Okay, cool. Next slide. Next person, sorry. Next slide. So our recommendation, again, just the inclusion from the start. You guys can have the slides if that is allowed, Benita, after this, to have a look at this. So I've mentioned that, so I'm not going to do that again, but it's then, once you've included them from the start, think about what does it look like? What is the implementation going to be? What would monitoring and evaluation look like? How do we include them? Would it be focus groups? Are we doing post-assessments? How do we disseminate those findings? So sort of looking at that. And then noting the context and the phases of the projects. Defining the roles is super important. Define the roles. Don't let there be like a misalignment. Lived experience should stay within lived experience, and research with research, but it doesn't mean that you can't sometimes work together in certain little elements. But I think just from the start being clear, and that both parties, or all parties involved, understand. So these are like really simple menial things, but we miss that in the process sometimes. So it's just going back to the basics. And then at the end of the day, promoting well-being, right? Reasonable accommodation is a very big thing. And it's not just for people with lived experience, it's for any human being. But we are dealing with lived experience in this particular instance, right? So are we understanding that them, apart from time zone differences, are we understanding that that person may need to be taking really strong medication at night? So are we okay to start a meeting just slightly later? Something as simple as that, right? Something as simple as just clearly defined roles, because someone with anxiety or severe anxiety, seeing just everything everywhere may not work, right? Again, it's not a big difference, because everybody experiences anxiety. Everybody gets sad sometimes. So if you just put yourself in a position where someone has that condition, we just need to make sure there's reasonable accommodation. That said, we, again, internally have got a structure for that. So if you're working with an organization like us, we will be able to guide you with that, so you don't feel alone, right? We're learning from both sectors. Next slide, please. Planning must make provision for sufficient resources, logistical support, okay, and just reinforcing the equal pay for equal work, making sure you've got reasonable funds for everybody included. And then there's the principles of engagement. I'm going to give you a slide, and you can also find that document on our website. So it's easily downloadable, and you can kind of keep it with you together with WHO's framework for meaningful engagement. There's like a list of principles. So how do we create a conducive engagement environment? So we need to make sure we're preventing power imbalances and risk of conflicts through equal stakeholder relationships. These principles are based on respect, responsibility, accountability, non-discrimination, equality and equity, knowing that equality and equity are different, right? Equity going into the processes being equal, and fair, confidentiality, honesty, integrity, trust. And a very, very big one is transparency and valued contributions. So if you go to the next slide, I'm pretty sure it's in the next slide. Yeah, it's called our consult guidelines. So this you can find on our websites, and on the right-hand side is basically just a short summary of what I've gone through. But so important to just remember leveraging on the experiences, and then thinking about how to make it meaningful and authentic by including all these principles I've mentioned, just thinking about the actual process, how would you involve other stakeholders, and making it the same and making it applicable to us as well as people with lived experience. And then once we kind of get that right, then the process is smooth sailing, right? And everybody's got equal respect for everyone in the process. So I really just try to cram in everything. I hope I didn't go over time. I know this is a lot to take in, so happy to have some questions if anyone does have any. And yeah, happy to hear from anyone. Thank you. Oh yeah, and that's There's our website, so gmhpn.org. And at any point, if you do want to email me, please feel free to.
Thank you, Claudia. Wonderful presentation. So everyone, if you have any kind of queries or concerns, you can write down in the chat box, or you can raise your hand using the Zoom app as well. Yeah, I agree with Brandon as well. The presentation was really impactful. Like I was thinking that we are focusing on the capacity building of mental health researchers, and this is definitely a great like chance to learn about the people with lived experience and their involvement, and global mental health peer network as well, which is very important in mental health research as well, and for the researchers who are interested in their involvement as well. So please feel free to ask any kind of queries or concerns.
Did I scare people away? Or do we not have questions?
Yeah, or we can facilitate the discussion questions as well. Yeah. Yeah, actually, we already have a question from Drishti Guru. So, how does GMH peer network ensure diversity within PWLEs, not just in terms of diverse mental health conditions, but also socioeconomic background, its intersectionality and structural vulnerability are also integral part of lived experiences? How are diverse voices taken into account in decision making and contributions?
Thank you. Good question. Yeah, so I mean, for us, right, when we are so you're right in that we're not just diverse in mental health conditions. That's not the point, right? The diversity rests in the people that are part of the network. So we have members, like I had mentioned earlier, from 52 countries, which means it's not the conditions that we are concerned about. It's how many voices can we get, how many perspectives can we get from across the world that can come and share their recommendations. So that diversity is there, right? We then, depending on what requests we get, we would then bring in members to be part of decisions, be part of research projects, be part of advisory committees. They all get a chance to be part of that. So we sort of, for lack of a better word, recruit then members to do this consultancy services with us. So they become a part of that, which means that they are contributing their experiences, and we don't limit it. Sometimes our client or the research will have particular limitations that we only need members or individuals from certain countries. Then we don't really have a say, because that's what the funding is requiring and that's what the project requires. However, that said, is we take into account everybody's decision. There is no right or wrong. We stand for equality, and we have our GMHPN charter, which is available also online, which is exactly what we stand for. So we won't go anything that's, for example, let's just say we're against animal and like abusing animals, just as an example. We're not going to take part in that, right? But we will bring in people that come in with different views and perspectives, so that diversity is always there. And every year we do 2 call for applications to join the network. And what we then do is we go in and we look at which countries are still lacking representation, what age group. So we look into that. We then work together within the global office, so the management team, and we say, okay, these are the countries that need further voices. And then we also look at what are the requests that we are getting, where it seems to be where most of the research is taking part now, so that we can have those voices and that experience and diversity when these kinds of things come up. I hope that answered. Your question, Dristy?
Yeah, actually, we have another question from Sohard Rai. And so, can you share your experience on how the landscape has changed over the years on lived experience involvement in mental health research, policy, and intervention across the world?
Let's see. Okay, yeah. Saharda, nice to hear from you again. So glad that you can be here today. There has been a big change in terms, so from like when we first started, what was trending, for lack of a better word, versus what's sort of trending now, right? Which countries or regions are being looked at. So I see now, for example, it's sitting more within research and implementations in countries like Brazil, regions like Asia, whereas I would say about 3 years ago, it was really, really big in the Africa space, just as an example. Also, at the start of when we really started providing services, there was a lot of requests for only anxiety, depression, and psychosis. And I do actually remember in one of the calls that I had, I said, then we're being very exclusionary right now, right? Because what about people with other conditions? What about those that overlap? So definitely seen a change in terms of the landscape, in terms of topics, in terms of areas. And then, of course, I've seen on the other hand, seeing the change from including people with lived experience into these initiatives and what that looked like, right? It was very much tick box, and it can still be. And we do experience that, and I would push back. I do lead the consultancy services unit, so I would push back and say, I'm not okay with this. We've got to work around it. But then there's been a really gigantic change in incorporating lived experience. And I do see how researchers are really trying to learn from us. And at the same time, we're being open-minded about learning from researchers. So it's reciprocal. Definitely have seen a change over the years, though. Then I did just quick see a thing about Nepal. We don't actually have representation in Nepal. And I asked Nagendra in June or July, so I'm throwing him on, under the bus here. I would love somebody, people from Nepal. So if you guys have anyone that you would recommend, we would love to also help capacity building there and bring representation further.
Yeah. Yeah, we are also looking forward to the collaboration as well. Like I'm saying from the side of Nepal and Nepali researchers who are interested in that as well. So anyone, if you have any kind of queries additional to what Claudia has mentioned before, like any kind of different queries. So we still have some minutes for the discussion as well.
I did see Elizabeth had her hand up earlier. I don't know if we missed that.
Yeah, actually I missed that earlier. So I'm not seeing her actually.
Yeah. Maybe she's gone off. Sandra, I know you there. That's my global manager. I want to ask her if she has anything to say.
I had a funny feeling I was going to be thrown in the fire. Thanks, Claudia. I think I just obviously want to support what Claudia has presented today. And as someone with lived experience, who has been part of research in different roles, I can vouch for the fact that it is more authentic and meaningful when you do incorporate lived experience from the get-go. I've been involved in a number of projects where, as Claudia mentioned, there's a lot of tokenism, where you just fill in a survey or answer a couple of questions and that kind of thing, and it's not authentic. And we're also backed by evidence these days. I mean, scientific and academic evidence shows us that outcomes are enhanced when you involve people with lived experience in research from the get-go. So yeah, it's really lovely, obviously, to hear Claudia's presentation and all the work that's gone on behind the scenes. the C's as well, I'm sure as well. But in terms of equal remuneration and such as well, because this isn't just a job for us, it's literally our experience as our life. And that's interpreted as purpose for many as well. So yeah, just very proud of what Claudia has presented today and to be part of the team. And thanks, Clouds, for throwing me under the bus. I wouldn't expect anything less. But thank you to everybody who's on the call and taking interest in this presentation as well. It's really appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chandra. Yeah, actually, I agree with you as well that it's our pleasure to hear all the experiences and the engagement of lived experiences, what Claudia has said earlier as well. And we also have one questions from Brandon. So after that, we will be then summarizing the webinar. So how do you recommend people reach out at the early phase of coming up with an idea? For example, what about students who may not have a big budget but want to brainstorm with experts by experience at the inception? Are there things they can do locally?
Very, very good question. So we have had experiences where this has happened. And at that point, what we do, and try not to give too much away about the operational side of it, but is we do kind of help and give back where we can. We can't always do it. So we would look at it. We wouldn't exclude it at all. We would refer if necessary. But the thing is, I think it's just about that open and honest communication. And if we're brainstorming together as well at early stages, there's always a way of kind of thinking about how we can do things. How do we look at the logistics? So instead of 25 people, can we have 3 people? So for me, quality over quantity, right? And locally, I guess, I mean, definitely putting into getting people in contact. So of course, sometimes if they would, so for example, say you needed people from the network, and it's a small budget, sometimes we just say to our member, you know what, go ahead with it on your own, in your individual capacity, at your local level, join it, don't miss this opportunity, and then it's up to them. So we would never prevent any of that, but it's always good to just be open and honest about it. Brandon, does that help?
Yeah, I think that has helped. So because of all this silence. So Claudia, do you have any kind of closing remarks or summary that you want to share?
I think for me, it's just really about thinking about what your project is, and then thinking about how to include people with lived experience can be a little bit overwhelming, and not understanding the platform too much and not understanding what it means. But we are very open to communication. We are open to discussing. So if there's ever any questions and you just need a little bit of guidance or help, my team's always here to just give a little bit of assistance when needed. Brandon and I work together a lot, so I'm happy to be in there and facilitate if needed. But yeah, I'm just really keen to see what the future holds for early career researchers and how start seeing that change that we've been advocating for over all these years, to actually see this happening. But wishing everybody the best of luck, and thank you so much for asking me to join today's webinar.
Yeah, we are also really thankful for your time and efforts, Claudia. And despite having the technical issues at the beginning, like the webinar went really well. So thank you everybody for your patience and waiting for the time, like how we were trying to make this webinar happen, make this webinar more better. And at last, all these matters is that what we are learning and what we have learned from the webinar as well. So hopefully everything goes well in the next webinar as well. So, and I just want to mention that we are really grateful for the efforts of Claudia as well, and for everybody. And is there anything you want to ask at the last? I can ask, because we still have 5 more minutes in the webinar. And yeah, I just want to remind you to fill up the feedback form as well, which Ritika ma'am has just shared in our chat box as well. So if you have any kind of suggestions or related to the title, or if you have want any kind of materials related to this webinar or previous webinar, you can directly email us to our MHRN email address as well. And yeah, just to remind you that we do share the webinar materials to the registered participants. So please do register the webinar as well for the materials as well. And yeah, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Thanks so much for being
Yeah.
there.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. You're welcome. Take care.
And if anybody if anyone has any questions going forward, please feel free to write to us at MHRN as well, because this is a very interesting topic. This is a topic that impacts us all. It's a very timely topic, interesting, important. It has all the eyes. So please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll try to take a little bit more time of Claudia to try and get back to people if you have any questions. Anyone?
Thank you.
Pintaji, I think we're good to end.
Bye, Claudia. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.